So I want to share some tools and techniques that will help you when you're analyzing your image and make at least a mental roadmap of what the image might need throughout the retouching process. And I want to talk just briefly kind of about the ethics and the philosophy of portrait retouching. It's kind of a controversial topic. A lot of people have different opinions. How much is too much, issues of body image and things like this. My philosophy with retouching my personal work is to do as little as possible. I am generally a very minimalistic retoucher, and if I can err on the side of doing less rather than more, I will. That being said, when I'm doing paid work, it's usually not up to me. It's up to my client and their desires. So all of the techniques that I will show you can be applied at any strength or any level that you want. We can take a 75-year-old woman and make her look like she's 20, if we want to. But it's entirely up to you. Obviously, everything is up to you as to how far you want to take things. If you want to make somebody slimmer or make somebody larger or, the degree of skin smoothing, all of these things. I don't make any value judgments about any of that. I'm going to show you techniques and just leave it up to you to decide how far you want to take these things. I just want to get that out of the way because a lot of people have different ideas about this, and I don't want you to think that I'm advocating for anything. I'm just kind of giving you tools and leaving it to you to decide what you want to do with them. That being said, a lot of people, I think, especially when they're first starting out, they kind of struggle. They open an image in Photoshop and then they don't really know what to do. What does an image actually need? And so the workflow steps help with that. Having kind of an idea of all of the things that are possible will help you to think about those things one by one. You can go through and say, well, how's the hair looking? Are there any crazy flyaways? And how's the silhouette looking? Or is the clothing hanging properly? Or is there some, weird part of a shirt that's sticking out that needs to be pushed in? How does the person look, in regards to perspective, and where was the photographer? Is there any distortion going on? Things like this, or sort of the things that we want to think about up front as we're deciding what a particular image needs. And we also want to think a few steps ahead and kind of imagine, if we do want to do some creative retouching, what that might look like. And we can kind of start to formulate a plan of how we think an image might look best. And there are a few tools and kind of tricks that we can apply in Photoshop to see our images in kind of different ways. And that can help us to identify some of these issues that I was just talking about with shape and hair and things like this. There are a few layers that we can create that will change the appearance of the image and can help to illuminate those kinds of things. So I'll show you that. And there are also a few tricks that we can do as far as flipping the image around and things like this that can really help to kind of disrupt the way that we're perceiving the image just in its normal state. And that can help to illuminate some of these things as well. So let's jump into it. So here we are in Photoshop. This is the image that we're going to work on first, but these layers that we're going to create can be applied to any image. And they're what I call helper layers, and they're basically just layers that we're going to turn on and off that will affect the visibility of the image. They're not anything that we're actually going to use to adjust the image. They're just sort of there to alter the way that we see the image. And again, that'll help us to identify things that might need to be fixed. So the first one that we'll create is called a solarizing layer. So we want to start with a curves layer here. And basically what we want to do is drop 4 points on the curve. So the first one, we're going to drag it up here, kind of in the center of this first box here in the upper left corner of the curves. And then we're going to grab the line and bring it down into more or less the center of this box down here. And then the third one up here again. And then the fourth one down here. And we want to try and get these lines on the curve roughly even. It doesn't matter too much, and we can bring the highlight point and the shadow point up and down respectively about like that. So we just want the line to look more or less like this. And we see that makes the image look totally crazy, but when we zoom in, it also helps to illuminate features of the skin that we may or may not want to remove. So in this case, that's a mole that can be removed or not, depending on what you want to do. But it will also, if we come in here, some of these other imperfections will be sort of exaggerated by this solarization layer as well. Something like this and these smaller skin imperfections. And it can also be really helpful in looking at shape. So this image actually doesn't really need much shape work. I think if you imagine her silhouette, it's pretty good. I wouldn't push her arms in or anything like this. I think overall it looks quite nice. But it is really helping to eliminate this crease in her t-shirt, which without that curves layer is kind of hard to see. You might actually not pick up on that because it's a white shirt and this fold line here that should have been steamed out by the stylist is something that a lot of retouchers might miss, and turning on this solarization layer really exaggerates that. So that'll help us when we go to clean up some of these clothing issues as well. And here's another wrinkle in the shirt. And then we can rename this layer Solarize. And by the way, I'm including an action file. If you want to load that into Photoshop, it includes an action here. If you go to Actions under my name here, this one called Helper Layers, that will create these layers automatically. But I want to show you how to do it just so that you know kind of what's going on with these layers. So that's the first one, Solarize. And then the next one is kind of a luminance helper layer. So it's actually two layers. And the first one we'll do is a solid color layer. And we want to choose a neutral color that is close to 50% brightness. So, somewhere in the middle there. It doesn't need to be exact. And then hit OK. And then we're going to change this blending mode to color, which is down here at the bottom. And the keyboard shortcut for that, by the way, is Shift-Alt-Option-C, C for color. And we're going to call this 50% gray color, something like that. And then on top of that, we're going to create another new curves layer. And if you're using my custom keyboard shortcut that we set up, then that's Shift, Command, or Control M. And then with this one, we want to just pull the midtones down a little bit, something in there. And then we can rename this layer Midtones Darken. And then we want to group these two layers together. So I'm going to shift-click to select both of them and then press Command or Control G, G for group. And then we can rename this Luminance. And now this is obviously darkening the image and making it black and white. And we're kind of seeing the true luminance of the image in a darkened state. And this can also help to illuminate flaws, especially in the skin, and sensor dust and things like that can really be made more prominent by this luminance helper layer. So we can also come in and adjust this curve if we want to. Rather than just pulling the midtones down, we can add an S-curve of contrast. It depends a little bit on the individual image that you're working on, what will illuminate the most imperfections. But I find that generally just pulling the midtones down a bit like we did initially works pretty well. And then we can turn that on and off. So these two layers, the luminance and the solarize, again, those are just sort of helper layers. They're not something that we're ever actually going to apply to the image, but having them there can be really helpful to turn them on and off as we're going through the retouching, just to be able to see texture better and to make sure that we're not missing anything. And there are a few other ways to see the image in a different way. One is just with rotation. So if you press and hold R on the keyboard, you get the little rotate cursor there. And as long as you press and hold R, then you can rotate your image. And when you release R, then it's going to go back to whatever tool that you were using before. That's a little bit faster sometimes than switching to the rotate tool and then switching back to whatever tool you were using. That's kind of a nice time saver. Anyways, sometimes just flipping the image upside down like this and looking at it in that state can be really helpful as well, especially when you're trying to analyze the shape of an image, because it's not, we're used to seeing our images obviously in their upright way. By flipping them, our brain is kind of decoding them a little bit differently. So things like silhouette and color and some of these things will sometimes jump out at you when you see the image just simply inverted like that. And by using that rotate tool, we haven't actually rotated the file. If I press the escape key, it's going to go back to the way that it was. It's just rotating the view. So we can set it wherever we want it. It doesn't have to be upside down. You can set it to any angle you want. And zoom in and zoom out and see the image, in that way. And even if you kind of squint, just close your eyes just enough so that you just barely see the image on screen. That's a great tip while you're shooting, by the way, as well. Anytime you squint and just look through the slits of your eyelids, you're going to see contrast more than detail, because the detail is sort of blurred out by your eyelids. And seeing something just for its contrast can be really helpful as well, to get a better idea of these things. And one thing that we can do that can be helpful while we're doing all of this kind of pre-analysis of the image is just create a new blank layer and call it markup. And then on this layer, you can use the brush tool. You can pick a bright color, whatever color you want, can be this color. And then just kind of start making marks on the image. You can choose a hard brush and just draw some little marks for yourself, things that you might want to address, bigger skin imperfections, flyaways, things like this, this, and just kind of go through, here's a wrinkle on the shirt. And this image doesn't need a ton of work. There's a bunch of skin smoothing, which we don't really need markups for. But this can be helpful later, because you might spend a fair bit of time with this image, and by the end you might have forgotten something. So just clicking this markup layer back on later on in the process can be really helpful, just to make sure that you don't forget anything. And if you want, you can drop the opacity of this layer maybe to 50%, so it's a little easier to see what's happening underneath it. So those are a few techniques that you can use to analyze your image and kind of get an idea of what it needs. And when we come back, we'll start with the actual retouching. So we'll get into the shape.